I'm Sam Eckmann of Gold Derby, and with me is Christophe Beck, the composer of WandaVision on Disney Plus. And Christophe, you have actually worked in the Marvel Cinematic Universe before on both Ant-Man films, and this was a WandaVision is a wildly ambitious project. But having worked with Marvel at all, did you feel like you had a little bit of a leg up or preparation? Was any of the scheduling or world felt the same and prepared you in any way?
Absolutely, and how. And thank you, Sam. I appreciate you having me on. Um, Marvel's post-production process is can be a little bit chaotic, and um, there are there is typically a lot of changes that occur, especially when we go down to the wire and into the final audio mix of the project. So my experience on the two Ant-Man films um, definitely helped me plan ahead, make sure that I had my crew assembled, and it also prepares me mentally for what's to come. If I'm ready for anything, then it makes it easier to deal with the anythings that do tend to come up. And you're right, WandaVision is an extremely ambitious project. There's all the different decades represented musically as well as visually. So I knew I was going to have a really strong, strongly organized and prepared team of people to get ready for all the different production challenges that come up when you're dealing with a show where each episode is in a different musical style with different instrumentations and different recording techniques. So knowing how bonkers the show was going into it, and knowing, having a lot of familiarity with the Marvel post-production process and all the people involved, the cast of characters, made things go a lot smoothly. If this were my first Marvel project, I think I would have been in for a serious trial by fire.
Well, we should talk about the sitcom worlds for a little bit because, one of the major conceits of this show is we're jumping into a different decade of sitcoms each episode. And what was sort of the research and preparation process like for you? Because, as you said, the sound and the music has to change with each episode. How did you feel like you had to respond to the music from those classic sitcoms?
Sure. I'm a child of the 70s and 80s, and to some extent the 90s and 2000s as well. Those are the eras of television that I grew up with. The styles of music in those shows tended to be more pop, more rock, and it's in my DNA. I knew that the show was starting in the 50s and 60s, however, and those styles are a little bit more classic, jazzy. This is something that is not in my DNA. So the first thing I did was bring on someone to my team named Alex Kovacs, who is really something of a specialist in that style of music. And what we did was watched a lot of those early shows to get a feel for how, not only what the style of music is and the instrumentation, but also how they used music, how much music was in those shows. What we call spotting in film music. And a lot of conversations about how we can most faithfully and lovingly recreate those sounds.
Yeah. And in terms of recreating them, was the goal sort of to try and use the same type of orchestrations and instruments as back then? How did you translate those old sounds into today?
Absolutely. And in those days, for example, in the 50s, you would have a small ensemble, maybe 8 strings and some woodwinds. In the 60s, things got a little bit more rhythm sectiony. And of course, in the 70s and 80s, we get into those rock eras and pop. The other thing that we took inspiration from were the theme songs written by Bobby and Kristen Lopez. Those songs were finished, and they too were lovingly crafted to be authentic to the eras. And for example, for the second episode, which was a 60s episode, the theme song had a Latin feel, kind of reminiscent maybe of Bewitched or I Dream of Jeannie. And I decided to have the score reflect that. So we use some of the same instrumentations and some of the same styles. Whereas the very first episode, the Dick Van Dyke I Love Lucy style, was more small orchestra playing really classic jazz styles. We introduced bongos and rhythm section and a Latin feel into the second episode, which more closely follows what Bobby and Kristen were doing with the theme songs. In addition to that, we would take little motifs and melodies from each of the songs and incorporate them into the background music whenever we could.
Yeah, you've actually worked with that pair of
yes.
Before on both Frozen movies, and is it a strange process to integrate someone else's work? How seamless is it weaving those in? Are there lots of conversations with them about weaving in songs into your score, or does that sort of happen organically for you?
It happens organically for me because it comes from my heart, and it comes from my knowing that when collaborating with songwriters, either in a musical like the Frozens, or where there are theme songs, especially a high concept like this one, where there's a different theme song in each episode, it comes from my belief and knowing that if I can take those elements from those songs and weave them in to the score in artful ways, sometimes in subtle ways, sometimes in obvious ways, just relying on my instincts to guide me through that process, then I can create a more cohesive musical experience. I can help make the songs more memorable by reinforcing the tunes from them as the show goes on. And it works the other way too. When I incorporate something from one of the songs into my score, there's an instant familiarity to it because the audience has already heard that tune, sometimes several times. And it creates a real feeling of musical connection from the beginning of the show to the end.
Mm. One of the, what I would assume is a pretty exciting thing musically for this show is the opportunity to create Wanda's theme, because unlike many Avengers, she hasn't had her own solo outing yet. And it's a great piece that I believe plays the credits of every episode. How did you approach creating a theme for a character?
That's a great question. For Wanda, there are really two crucial elements to her character. One is that she is, she's known as the Scarlet Witch by the time the series is on, and she has a strong supernatural element to her, and this her powers can be used, to put it simply, for good or evil. And that's one of the great things about this show, is that you root for her, but at the same time, you understand that she is using her powers to take an entire town hostage against their will. So there's definitely a dark side there, as well as a light side. And the way I accomplished embodying that musically was to deliberately make her theme really, really simple. It's really just 3 notes and they repeat. And the simplicity of those notes means that I can put different musical stuff underneath it. And I can make it be heroic one moment, and I can make it be a little bit darker and more mysterious in another moment. It was also important to me to capture the other aspect of her character, which is her love story with Vision, and that's such a crucial part of the story. And for that part of it, there's a beautiful section in the middle where the strings come in and the music feels more lyrical, and you can really feel it shift just a little bit towards something a little bit more romantic and something with a little bit more longing in it. And underpinning the whole thing is a very specific kind of rhythmic device with the strings. It almost sounds like cascading waterfalls of fast notes on the strings. And that was really there to give it propulsion and momentum, and frankly, to place it a little bit more strongly within the Marvel universe, where the music and the themes, throughout the 20 plus episode franchise have had that quality to them, that quality of propulsion. So that was my thinking going into the creation of Wanda's theme.
Yeah, there's one moment I loved there. I'm a very big Buffy the Vampire Slayer aficionado, and you won an Emmy for Buffy and worked on many episodes. And the vocal, the sort of like soaring, hovering vocals there sound a lot. It reminded me of Hush, which for fans who aren't as big Buffy watchers, the one where the gentlemen come in and it's a mostly wordless script. Are there ever aspects of an old project where you look back in it and you suddenly find the key to what you're working on currently?
Well, it's never something I do consciously. In the case of Wanda's theme, that was a deliberate choice to evoke first of all the feminine nature of the main character, using a female vocal, by the way, sung beautifully by Merritt Lear. And also there's something about vocals and the way they're used in the theme, where the actual pitches slide around from note to note instead of being really kind of precise and clinical. You get a real kind of human feeling to it that also evokes the supernatural. And as I said in your previous question, that was a big part of what I wanted to get out of that theme. As to the similarities to Hush, they are unconscious and unintentional, but that's my style. All the music I write reflects my entire lived musical experience and my taste. So I'm not surprised that it's reminiscent of that episode of Buffy.
Yeah, I appreciated it, hearing some similarities in there.
Great.
The other really cool aspect that you got to create was music for Monica Rambeau, who, even though the show is about really Wanda and Vision at the center, it is also depicting her becoming a superpowered being. And that moment where she goes through the hex for the final time has a really great musical theme where it's kind of both triumphant and scary. How did you think of that moment?
Yeah. She has a theme, and the first time you hear it is when she wakes up in the hospital in the 4th episode, I believe it is. Just as I tried to do with Wanda's theme, as a composer, when you build a theme, you think about all the different ways that theme can be stated and all the different emotional contexts in which it can be presented. I do remember that specific moment that you're mentioning as well. That was one piece of music that went through a lot of iterations until I found just the right balance of scary and triumphant. It was important to Matt Shackman, the director, that when she breaks through that hex and you can see her different selves kind of splitting apart and coming back together. It's a very trippy moment that culminates in a refusing of all her different selves into one, and the emergence of her powers in that moment. We really wanted to feel that transition from scary to triumphant. And at first I was a little too subtle with it, as sometimes I tend to be. After a number of rewrites and adjustments, we finally found it to where it felt scary enough when she was in there, that the triumphant part really lands at the end. And once you hear that triumphant part, over the course of the 4 or 5 episodes that precede it, you have heard Monica's theme many times, but never quite in the presentation that you hear it in when she finally busts through. So it's a very satisfying musical moment.
Yeah. And most of your work as of late, up until WandaVision, has been in film. How does the experience compare between working on a series or a movie? Is one of those more difficult to you?
They're all difficult. And I will say that there is no real fundamental difference in terms of the creative process. You know, it's all musical storytelling. It's all just me sitting down, looking at a scene, thinking about what the characters should be feeling at that moment, making a decision about which of those feelings would best serve the story to emphasize. One of the things, you know, I can compare working on WandaVision as a TV series to a film, and I can compare it also to working on a different TV series. You mentioned Buffy. Buffy the Vampire Slayer and television shows, all television shows back then that were being broadcast weekly on the broadcast networks, that was a very tight schedule. They would shoot an episode, they would edit it, we would score it, and then we move on. And once you get into a rhythm, all those post-production schedules kind of overlap. So basically, by the time it gets to me, I'm doing an episode every week. I do not know what's going to happen in an episode until I see it. So I'm kind of flying by the seat of my pants. I don't really have an opportunity with a 22 episode broadcast season to sit down and look at the architecture of the whole season and make sound planning decisions about how themes are going to be developed, and knowing, oh, hey, in the last episode, this is going to happen. Maybe I can start planting seeds in episode 2, 4, 6. That was different on WandaVision. I was able to read all the scripts. I was able to understand exactly what the central themes storytelling-wise were. And I was able to plan the musical themes accordingly. And it gave me an opportunity to treat the entire 9-episode run as a single 6-hour movie. And as a result, I believe it is my most deeply developed thematic score. The seeds I was able to plant in the first episode pay off in the 9th episode in a way that just isn't possible with a show like Buffy, with a 22 episode, you know, weekly broadcast schedule, or in a feature film where there's only a 2-hour runtime, and you can't quite do thematic conceptualizing on as grand a scale as you can when you're looking at a 6.5 hour piece of work. I really, and I think we all did, think of it as a single cohesive piece of filmmaking from beginning to end. Of course, you know, the episode structure is crucial to the conceit of the show, that each episode is a different sitcom era, but from a storytelling perspective, it really is one piece.
Yeah. Well, I think that is a great place to leave it. Thank you, Christophe, so much for talking with me. If you're out there watching, subscribe to Gold Derby. And Christophe, best of luck throughout this season.
Thank you very much.